welcome everyone to OnPoint Technologies and PCM webinar Wednesday. For the Microsoft webinar, which is Hybrid Identity, Cloud and On-Prem, no problem. Joining us today to present on this is Brian Mensher, who is Microsoft Azure Specialist from PCM and OnPoint. Before we go into our main presentation, we have got some housekeeping items. Please enter your question in the question box on the right-hand side, and I'll relay those over to our speaker at the end of the presentation. There will be a survey which will be emailed to you at the end of the presentation, which will be a referral entry for you to win an MX gift card. Also, this is a recorded session, and the recording will be up for view within the next few days, and you can watch the recording at www.onpoint.com/webinar. So with that, I'm happy to announce and give the rights to Brian Mensher. You have got the right. You have got the ball now.
Okay, thank you, Norman. I appreciate that. Can everyone see my screen here? I would say that's a question for you, Norman. Norman.
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, wonderful. So good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. I appreciate your time in joining us for this webinar to go over hybrid identity, some questions about it, what it is, what it can do for you, if you should be using it, and so on and so forth. We'll go over that a little bit later. But just a quick introduction to myself. My name is Brian Mensher. I'm the Azure Specialist for PCM OnPoint, and I cover pretty much up and down the East Coast of the United States and pretty much this side of the Mississippi, so the east side of the Mississippi. And really what I do a lot of the times is talk with customers like yourselves, educate them around the Microsoft Cloud, what's coming out down the pike, and really kind of helping to identify what workloads really make sense for customers to move to the cloud, the Microsoft Cloud for. And what lines up with your IT roadmap best. So just a little introduction of myself on that. So we'll go ahead and get started. We'll go get the boring agenda stuff out. We do want to kind of line some of this stuff up and level set. So we're going to go over hybrid identity, what that means, what Azure Active Directory is, because that's an important piece of this, the benefits and features of hybrid identity, and then exploring how to connect your on-premise directories to the cloud, the different tools, and what that might look like. So questions you might be asking yourself about integrated identity and hybrid identity and kind of hearing all these different terminologies. And I get questions asked quite often on calls about this topic. What is Azure Active Directory? Is it a part of Active Directory, directory services? Do I need it? There seems to be multiple tools. I'm a little bit confused about what's out there and what can actually help me make those connections. We talked about, we're going to talk about benefits. Things like, if I have ADFS, can that work with, integrating with Azure Active Directory? Those types of questions. So we're going to try to address those and some that might not even be up here. And of course we do have a couple minutes at the end of the presentation to go over some of those as well. So to level set and kind of talk about what seems to be a driver or the current reality for a lot of organizations today is that there are kind of this chaotic, and some of you may have already seen this type of graphic out there. It's been used quite a while, but I think it does really help illustrate where a lot of organizations are with the access that they have, the users that they have to manage those devices, what they have on premises today, and how to make all that work together. How do I get my users the access to the data they need, easily reduce my overhead as an IT team, but improve their user experience. So this being the kind of the current reality, all these different services, third-party SaaS applications, Office 365, the Salesforces, Dropbox, all that you kind of see a part of this particular slide and how can we make this a more simple environment. And there's lots of different users accessing many different applications, so that user experience can be frustrating because of the need to remember many different credentials for all their different applications. So that's a main driver as well. What can we do for the IT group, but what can I do for my users? So when we talk about hybrid identity and using identity as a control plane, this is really where Microsoft has moved with a lot of this. They want to make sure that they have that one spot to, that identity, that single set of credentials that helps control and maintain this environment so that it's an easy switch over and access. So from the prior slide, we looked at all that kind of chaotic look and what it's out there in a lot of different organizations today. We see that consumer-based devices are proliferating in the corporate world, and that cloud-based software as a service applications are pretty easy to adopt. And as a result of that, maintaining control of users' application access across internal data centers and cloud platforms can become challenging. Microsoft Identity solutions span on-premises and cloud-based capabilities, creating a single user identity for authentication and authorization to those resources, to all resources, regardless of location. This is what we call hybrid identity through Microsoft. So by extending your on-premise directories to the cloud, you can use that identity as that central control plane to manage and maintain, give that access and identity management from kind of one place. So if we just take a quick look at this slide, we see what's on premises today on the left-hand side. You're probably using Windows Server, Active Directory, directory services. That's in, I think, 93% or so organizations today, but there are other directories. So this process of hybrid identity and synchronization is not just for Windows Server, Active Directory. It can be used with other identity directories. Synchronizing that with Microsoft Azure Active Directory gives you that single sign-on is really a big driver, and that central management hub, if you will, that pane of glass for access to not only Azure, public cloud, Office 365, and those third-party SaaS applications. And we'll go over this, of course, in more detail in some follow-up slides. But through that, not only making it a simple connection for the IT staff, but we're now providing, as mentioned before, the single sign-on process, or single sign-on, which is very, very useful, and then the self-service. So before going too much more down the pipe as far as the hybrid identity, we kind of have to take a step back and say, what are we connecting to? So that's why we need to just take a quick look at the definition. I'll try not to read off all these slides because I know you all can do that out there, but when we talk about Azure Active Directory, what is it? And the Azure Active Directory, the definition, or Azure AD as it's known in a lot of places, is Microsoft's multi-tenanted cloud-based directory and identity management service, combining directory services, advanced identity governance, application access management, and rich standards-based platform for developers. It's available in 3 editions, a free, basic, and premium. And we'll just take a look at those quickly, the differences, because I think it's important to know kind of what you're getting and the different features that are included in those different Azure Active Directory levels. So the Azure Active Directory free comes along with Office 365. So if you're already using Office 365, you may not be aware of it, but you actually have Azure Active Directory running behind the scenes, and that's giving you that identity and access management for the cloud sign-ons to Office 365 or your Azure tenant. So pretty basic things there, as you can see. And all these build off each other. So the Azure Active Directory Basic includes everything that was a part of the free version, but adds a couple different pieces of functionality in the blue shaded area. I'm not going to go over all of them, but really the big differences there are you start getting SLAs based around the identity and access management. the self-service password resets for cloud users. Now, it doesn't include write back, and we'll get into that just in a moment, but it's important to know that for cloud users, they can actually reset their passwords, and that's a pretty nice feature. With the premium, there's a little bit more, and we'll talk about that. With the Azure Active Directory Premium, as said, they build on top of each other. In the green shaded area there towards the bottom, there are a few really standout items, and this is what we see a lot of organizations starting to use with regard to synchronizing those two Azure Active Directory, or Active Directory on premises, excuse me, with Azure Active Directory, and some of the benefits from that synchronization. So there's self-service password reset with on-premises write back. So basically what that means is wherever your users are at, whether they're on a remote device or inside your walls on your network, signed onto their desktop or laptop or whatever they might have, or on their tablet or somewhere else outside of your walls, they can actually reset their password. And by using Azure Active Directory with the synchronization, you can write that back to on-premises. So all the synchronization that we really talk about for the most part is synchronizing your on-premises to Azure Active Directory. It's pretty much a one-way street, but there are some functionalities like this write back that can actually be coming from, or will come from, the Azure Active Directory instance back to on-premises. So those are some pretty important differences there. So that's one, the self-service password reset with write back. We see more and more organizations using. There's also multi-factor authentication, so if you need to add that extra layer of security, that's the two-factor authentication. And you're able to do things like put customizing branding on the application portal. So when your users go to use these applications that you've given them and you've synchronized their identities with, say they have 10, 15, 20 applications that you use day in and day out, they go to a web portal and look at that, and they get to see your company branding on that, not Microsoft or not some generic page, and that helps again with that user experience. As well as a little tool that comes alongside with it, it's called Cloud App Discovery, and that's pretty neat in that it's an agent. It gets installed on endpoints, and it can basically identify other third-party SaaS applications that are out there and are being used in your environment. We all might be very well aware that there's shadow IT out there sometimes in our organizations, and this tool can help get kind of a handle on that. If you have an investment in something like Office 365 and you have a few users out there using something like Dropbox and sharing information or putting information, sensitive company information into that Dropbox, and it's just a generic commercial version of Dropbox with no controls and things like that, that's a potential security leak. So this Cloud App Discovery gives you kind of a pane of glass to look at all of those third-party SaaS applications that you might not even know about, and some, of course, that you do, and you can do remediation on that. So real quick, now that we've kind of talked about Azure Active Directory, we're going to get into the benefits of it, and of course using the synchronization. So we can kind of move through this slide. So the directory, putting your directory on the cloud allows you, we talked about really the single sign-on is one of the biggest drivers we really have out there, because again, that centralized identity management allows you to corral, control, manage, and maintain that different access. And with the Azure Active Directory and the synchronization between the two on-premise and cloud directories, we can give access to over 2,600 pre-integrated popular SaaS applications. Also, it's not only just third-party SaaS applications that are out there that we can give access to. You can also put in line of business custom integrated apps that you have. You can use Azure Active Directory for. And again, a part of this synchronization as well. There's even ability to any web applications that you have on premises that you might have infrastructure. You can use the Azure Active Directory application proxy to provide a connector that sits over top of that application and allows then Azure Active Directory identities and synced identities to access that on-premise application, web application. So just give an idea and show you how many, this is a kind of a small piece of the applications, the popular applications that are out there and pre-integrated with Azure Active Directory. So, given access to these applications that your workforce depends on and already likes using is getting even easier with Azure Active Directory and the synchronization, as it has these thousands, we talked about over 2,600 pre-integrated SaaS applications that you'll be able to, as an administrator, just go to the Azure Marketplace in a gallery type style of view and add assign those users access to these applications. And that can even be done by groups, not just one-offs, which is a nice feature as well. So, again, shown here is just a sampling of some of the more well-known applications. Chances are you'll find which applications you're already using today, and if you don't see the application listed here, you can actually request through Microsoft through a suggestion form. It's a 3 or 4 field form to evaluate. Example, probably at the beginning of this year we were at 2,500 SaaS applications, and now here in July, August, we're at above 2,600. So that's so we talked about single sign-on, which is really, like I said, a big part of the driver here behind this. But what else can we do? What are other benefits for us as IT staff to essentially manage these identities and access? And really, one of the biggest pieces for us on top of the single sign-on and simplifying this is group provisioning. So being able to provision users by groups to those SaaS applications we talked about earlier, rather than having to create separate logins with compatible SaaS applications like Salesforce, Facebook, and Dropbox. With Azure Active Directory already being federated, you can merely provision an entire group of users so that they can have access to those SaaS applications. Along with the provisioning, which is a big piece of the puzzle, also comes the ability to deprovision. So as those users leave your organization or as necessary, they can be disabled and removed from those groups, and then any application that they had access to is also removed instantaneously. So, again, your security concerns or things like that, and again, the ease of management around those users and giving that type of access can be taken away just as easily and as necessary. So this is a much more efficient way to manage identities and access, knowing you have the control with less overhead involved, and certainly a welcome solution. I'll let the slide, got ahead of myself. So there's built-in security features in Azure Active Directory. There's reportings and alerts. So you can view reports on sign-ins happening from new, previously unknown devices, highlight successful sign-ins that happen after multiple failures, and sign-ins that occur from different geographic areas in too short of a time period. So an example might be that I'm a normal employee in your environment. I'm trying to access the marketing Facebook page, and the system shows me logging in from Pennsylvania and Florida at the same time in too short of a time period, and that is just not physically possible. So there's reports and alerts that will generate off of that so that you can do some remediation and say what's going on here. And of course, if you see repeated patterns around that, you also can take next steps. So advanced reporting even gives you the ability to showing devices that the user employs specific application user, including application gallery, SaaS applications through the single sign-on, users with suspicious sign-on activity as a whole, devices suspected or confirmed to have been infected with malware, or sign-ins coming from IP addresses that have already shown suspicious activities. So what can we do after we get those alerts? And really this is where the multi-factor authentication, this is one of the ways we can remediate. So based off of those reports that we got earlier through the Azure Active Directory reporting, we can choose how to remediate those potential compromises in security by turning on things like two-factor authentication, also known as MFA or multi-factor authentication. The multi-factor authentication can be added to where it is needed, specific highly sensitive applications that require extra layer of protection, whether it be for compliance requirements or data security initiatives. Azure MFA can be used for both cloud and on-premises applications. You can activate MFA in Azure Active Directory to protect Microsoft Cloud applications like Office 365, OneDrive for Business, Windows Intune. We also talked about custom applications that use the Azure Active Directory, and then of course the hundreds of the pre-integrated SaaS applications available through the gallery that I mentioned earlier in the webinar. You can also link Azure multi-factor authentication directly into your own applications with the MFA software development kit for granular application-based control. So another one of the benefits, I talked kind of through some of them here, is also we've talked about improving that experience for your end users. And I mentioned about that web portal, that the application portal that's available, which we can customize and brand with the basic and the premium version of Azure Active Directory. So again, you're having that business continuity, or that continuity between the user experience when they go to access their applications, which all leads to happier end users, which most of the time leads to happier IT staff. And of course then if they can go ahead and manage their own account access, users can set their own group management. Users can manage their own membership into groups, or they can even be delegated the ability to control groups for other users. So that means the decision making of who should be in a particular security group or who needs access to what applications can be and remain a business function performed by those in the organization who have the appropriate knowledge and management authority, not necessarily an IT function, which is, again, we're helping our experiences as IT folk, but also giving an end user what they need and want to help them get to their results day in and day out quicker. So then those groups can even be configured to be open, where users can simply join or leave a group, on more casual applications that are kind of a temporary situation or don't need the restrictions around group management, as well as are controlled by an administrator or delegate in the case the user requests a membership change and is submitted for approval. There's also then the self-service password set that I mentioned earlier that is a really big user experience improvement. If it's not a difficult thing as IT staff to reset passwords and to change them, but as a former help desk personnel for almost 15 years at a state agency in Pennsylvania, I very well know that that can kind of be a pain in the rear, and if we can get that off our tables as IT staff, we can move on to bigger and better things. So with end users having the ability to reset their own password, and then of course with the Azure Active Directory Premium, we get that right back to on-premises. They can do it from wherever, and users are really responding to that. So the cost to add that is not that great to get that functionality alone, but if you're looking at the Azure Active Directory Premium, it also included those other benefits as well. So we looked at Azure Active Directory, hybrid identity as a whole. Now we need to kind of understand how to get those benefits, how to synchronize those identities. And what Microsoft has come up with is there's three main integration scenarios, being the cloud identity, synchronized identity, and federated identity. And cloud identity is just identities that live solely in the cloud. In the case of Azure Active Directory, that would reside specifically in your tenant's Azure Active Directory. So this is I talked about earlier, have an Office 365 or an Azure tenant, and you have your cloud identities for that access, and that can live solely by itself. We see smaller organizations or organizations that don't necessarily need to have Active Directory on premises or currently are utilizing it. Maybe they're using work groups instead of domains and things like that to manage curb authentication and group policies and those types of things. So we can use this cloud identity for that, which is certainly an option. But what we see a lot of organizations really looking towards and utilizing are the synchronized identities and the federated identities. So synchronized identities are just one's identities that live and exist on premises and in the cloud, because as the name kind of infers, we're synchronizing that on-premise directory with Azure Active Directory to give us that control plane and that management around identity and access that I keep on talking about. So those users, so with the Azure Active Directory Connect, which is the synchronization tool we'll go over here in a little bit, you can synchronize those environments, and the user's password hash is synchronized from on-premise environment to the cloud, and there's securities around that and different pieces, but that is just a password sync, and that experience gives a same sign-on. I know I talked about single sign-on, and sometimes I talk to organizations, and we need to work through that, the kind of the definition of the two. There is single sign-on, but when it comes to synchronizing the Active Directory that we have on premises with Azure Active Directory with the password sync, we are getting a same sign-on experience, meaning your end users will have a single set of credentials, which they typically appreciate, but as they move through applications, they will still be prompted for those credentials. So they don't have to remember multiple credentials, they just have to remember a single one and get access. So that's what we call same sign-on. The federated identity, or with the ADFS, Active Directory Federated Services, we can get that true single sign-on experience. And those identities also exist both on premises and in the cloud, but what's happening is your Active Directory, when you have users in the cloud, is hitting that Azure Active Directory and then passing that back through to your Active Directory on premises or wherever your ADFS environment is to give that authentication. So that's where you get the true single sign-on. Azure Active Directory with the federated ADFS is not actually doing the authentication up in the cloud. It's passing that through. So, and actually, I have a slide a little bit later on that goes over that in a little bit more detail, because it's important to know what your end users want and what you want to provide. But in moving along, we want to talk about how we're actually going to connect that. A lot of organizations today and environments are using DirSync. They're very, very familiar with DirSync. And as you can look here at the graphic, DirSync, and then after that, its successor was Azure Active Directory Sync. And then now we have this Azure Active Directory Connect, or Azure AD Connect tool. And that has now become the single supported tool from Microsoft moving forward, meaning that DirSync and Azure AD Sync are still out there, but they are depreciated, and Microsoft they've been hearing a lot of feedback from end users and organizations kind of saying, why is there multiple ways and multiple tools for me to do the synchronization? Can't you provide an easier way for me to just do some type of wizard and have one single tool or utility that kind of helps me through that process? And that's exactly what Azure Active Directory Connect is. It's not the synchronization by itself, but you can see here on the breakout, it's got three main parts: synchronization services, an optional ADFS, that is not necessarily something that's required, and then the health piece. So, and that's actually, get installed on an agent that gets installed on your identity servers and can give you reporting and insight into that environment and see what's kind of going on, which is a really, really neat piece to have that single pane of glass to take a look at all that. But to break down further on the synchronization services, so DirSync and Azure Active Directory Sync are, again, they're still around, but you want to really look to moving to upgrading or changing to the Azure Active Directory Connect. There's also a piece for the FIM and Azure AD connector that still has environments that might have Forefront Identity Manager on existing on-premises needs and environments. So that's why that's there. A lot of this focus is a little bit more towards the directory synchronization and Azure Active Directory sync, and then brand new synchronizations that are going on out there. We really wanted to encourage you to use the Azure Active Directory Connect. So with the, and I'll describe the Azure Active Directory Connect a little bit more in depth. So it helps you monitor and gain insight into your on-premise identity infrastructure and the synchronization services that happen within. It enables you to maintain a reliable connection to Office 365 and Microsoft Online Services by providing monitoring capabilities for your key identity components such as Active Directory Federated Services, Azure AD Connect servers, aka the sync engines, Active Directory domain controllers, etc. It also makes the key data points about these components easily accessible, making it easy to view the usage and other important insights. So again, we talk about the Azure AD Connect. This is just a different view of it, but this is how we're synchronizing those environments with that single tool. Really, Azure Active Directory Connect, and I alluded to it before, is more of a wizard that steps you through that process. It asks you certain questions and gives you different options based upon those answers that you give it, or at least considerations, and again, those guidances. So as we look at this graphic, and we kind of looked at it in a couple of different lights, so I'm not going to spend too much time, but again, we have the multiple different types of identity stores, and most common, the Azure Active Directory synced by using the Azure Active Directory Connect tool to provide that single sign-on, that common sign-on, and off to the right-hand side, you get access to all those different applications and use cases. So that's why we can kind of consider, and Microsoft didn't coin this, but Gartner did, your identity bridge. The Azure Active Directory piece really has kind of taken off and been more widely accepted as we go down. So having one place for all your identities in the cloud has made it even easier than before with the Azure Active Directory Connect. The ability to synchronize and extend your on-premises Active Directory or other directory stores to the Microsoft Cloud can be accomplished in less than half a dozen clicks. This is the express settings. There's also customized settings, which we'll go over a little bit in a little bit more detail. Of course, if you have a more involved or complex environment or need specific control over what attributes are synchronized between Active Directory on-premises and Azure Active Directory, then you can use the Customize Setup option when initiating the Azure Active Directory Connect tool. The latest sync engine is the Azure Active Directory Connect, and I'll move on to the next slide because that has some of the considerations. If you're already using DIR Sync or Azure Active Directory Sync, you can see there we have a depreciation schedule. So again, it's not that it's not supported. You can actually still use directory synchronization. It's just no new features are being added to it. So Microsoft, again, is encouraging customers who want to synchronize the Azure or the Active Directory on premises with Azure Active Directory or other identity stores, of course, to use the single tool so they have that common, useful, easy experience. So come a little less than a year, April 13th, 2017, then there will be no longer any support that you can expect from Microsoft on that. So when we look to upgrading from directory synchronization and Azure AD Sync today, there's just a few kind of best case or user experiences that we've had from before to kind of take a look at and say you want to look at maybe doing it this way or reasons behind upgrading a certain way. So if you're using directory synchronization and you have less than 50,000 objects, you have the option of that in-place migration that supports those custom configurations that you have. There are certain unsupported configurations such as the removed attribute flows. It may make sense that even if you have less than the 50,000 objects in your synchronizing between the two directory systems, that if it takes more than 3 hours, you would want to look at doing a side-by-side deployment. And that's what the second option is there, even with directory synchronization. So over 50,000 objects, or if you believe through other customizations and things like that, that update, that migration, if you will, to Azure Active Directory Connect is going to take more than 3 hours, so as to not interrupt your users during the production workday, that you do that with a side-by-side deployment. And then, of course, you can export the configurations from DirSync and import that into the Azure Active Directory Connect. And again, it's stepping you through the process to migrate that process or that environment. So Azure Active Directory Sync, you pretty much have the in-place upgrade. That won't take long, and it's just pretty much running the tool, answering a few questions, and you'll be able to move again to the Azure Active Directory Connect. So I talked about it a little bit earlier. Directory synchronization is what's out there, and most people are very comfortable with organizations when they want to do that synchronization to provide these benefits that we've talked about. DirSync is pretty much the quick and dirty solution, and much in that way through the Azure Active Directory Connect with the Express settings, we have that same type of ability. So if you have a single forest, pretty straightforward setup, a domain in Active Directory, you can go ahead and within that 4 clicks, you're up and running, and you actually have that synchronization, and actually will start that initial synchronization pretty much right away. So you're moving, again, those attributes and the hash of the password from on-premises to Azure Active Directory, and can start seeing those populate in Azure Active Directory. So again, much in the way of DirSync, you can get up pretty quickly with the Express settings. So if you need to, or you have a little bit more complex environment, the other setting is the custom. So it's not, you're not just put into one mode, whether it's a heavy customization and have to go through that when you just want some, those are the Express type settings that DirSync gives you, the quick synchronization, but you also have the ability to, through the custom setting, to allow these more advanced options, so multi-forest topologies, and there's a couple different ones. If anyone wants to know what those are, I don't have those in these particular slides, but I can send you some documentation, of course, afterward. We can follow up offline and share what those are, because there's many different topologies that are supported by the Azure Active Directory Connect. If you don't want to start the synchronization right away, there's like a staging mode. You know, I want to set all this stuff up, but I don't actually want that synchronization to take place right away for whatever that reason may be. You want to use the custom setting as well as using the ADFS or the Azure Active Directory Premium features. I talked about the password writebacks, and now there's even the ability to write back for users, groups, and devices from Azure Active Directory to the cloud as well, and that's going to expand. I didn't touch on that too much earlier in the presentation, but just to say that Microsoft has always had the idea that the Active Directory, the Azure Active Directory that they have, will work towards a full domain services, so that instead of having an Active Directory on premises that we're talking about synchronizing, eventually there'll be a fully maintained instance of Active Directory services, or the functionality in that provides you in the cloud, which I keep on getting asked about. And there is Azure Active Directory services, which is a subset of that. That today can be used for virtual machines in the Azure cloud, but not necessarily on-premise resources. So again, Microsoft is kind of moving this. We'll probably be on a webinar not too much down the line, and they'll be adding some functionality to this stuff as well. So I talked about it earlier. Maybe when you take a step back and you look at your business use case and the experience that you want to give your end users and what you need as an IT staff, when choosing which way to synchronize, whether you're using the Azure Active Directory Connect and providing the password synchronization, or if you're going to do ADFS, these are just some quick points to go over when you might use one over the other. So really the main feature is that if you don't, you're not able to, for an internal policy, can't use password hash syncing to the cloud, you're already using some type of third-party federation provider, or requirements around desktop single sign-on for domain joins, as well as some others there. A better way to look at that, and I talked about this earlier with the differences between the same sign-on and the single sign-on. This is a different way to look at it, but we talked about it earlier when we use the Azure Active Directory Connect for the identity synchronization with the password hash sync. The user's attributes are synchronized, including the password hash, and that authentication is done against Windows, the Azure Active Directory up in the cloud. So that's that same sign-on experience that we talked about. And then with the federated identity, those authentications are actually happening against your Active Directory services on premises. So again, Azure Active Directory is just passing that through. So to kind of further that, synchronization with password sync synchronizes a hash of a password hash. So there's no plain text view of the password. The actual password never leaves on premises and is not known by Azure Active Directory at all. When enabled, on-premise password policies apply consisting of password complexity and password expiration policy. So what you have set on premises when you synchronize those two environments, even with, or directories, apology, you can still have those password complexity and expiration policies attached to that with that synchronization, so that's pretty cool. The password sync even protects against pass-the-hash attacks. Well, that's a mouthful. Even if the hash is intercepted, it cannot be used to access any on-premise resources. Another nice thing to know is Microsoft, not too long ago, enabled password sync to work alongside of ADFS. At one point, you had to use one or the other. Well, now the password syncing can be done in conjunction with the Active Directory Federated Services as a quick and easy backup or a failover, if it were, because if you're using Active Directory Federated Services to provide that true single sign-on for your end users, that's wonderful. It's a great experience. The problem being if you don't have a highly available ADFS setup or there's a problem, then your end users can't get to anything. Again, because all that authentication is happening off of your Active Directory on premises. So it's a good backup to have that password synchronization kind of running alongside of that as that easy failover. So we talked about the different synchronization pieces, which are a lot of the meat and potatoes, but I mentioned the Azure Active Directory Connect Health because that is an important piece as well. So integrating your on-premises directories with Azure AD makes your users more productive by providing a common identity for accessing both cloud and on-premise resources. However, with this integration comes the challenges of ensuring that this environment is healthy so that users can access resources both on-premises and in the cloud from any of those devices that we talked about. Azure Active Directory Connect Health provides an easy cloud-based approach to monitor and gain insights through a single dashboard into your synchronization services and on-premise identity infrastructure that is used to access Office 365 or other Azure AD applications. It is as simple as installing the agent on the different identity servers. So once you have that agent installed there, it starts feeding information up to the Azure AD Connect Health service, and then of course displays that information. And you can see there that there's different monitorings and alerts, a lot of different reporting that can be done on the environment. You can even have them, that Azure Active Directory Connect sends you emails of critical alerts so that you can take action. And a lot of different Microsoft solutions and tools, especially within the cloud, are using more and more machine learning and analytics off of all the millions and billions of different transactions that are happening across Azure Active Directory, and that's put into this Azure Active Directory Connect so it can help analyze and look at your environment and give you some idea of what's going on. So even performing things like forensic analysis on the top users with bad passwords, it'll give you a breakout list so that you can look at those and of course touch base with those users or find out what's going on. I just talked about quickly how the Azure Active Directory Connect Health works. You install an agent on the ADFS proxy servers or your synchronization servers. That health agent runs locally and then gives you that information. So I don't want to go over too much more of that. You can get access to this through the Azure Management Portal. So you have that one spot. And then even further, when you go manage your machines and you're standing up your virtual machines, and of course you're manipulating the Azure Active Directory and managing that, you just go to a separate, a different link within that same management portal to get this type of insight and feedback information. So when we talk about licensing around the Azure Active Directory and hybrid identity and synchronizing those two directories, there's not a whole lot to pretty much simplify the concepts around that licensing in regarding to synchronizing your identities. Basically, we can say that if you are synchronizing from on-premises to the cloud, it's free. There's included synchronization that you do not have to pay for. We talked about that with the Azure Active Directory free version, or that level, which is included. So that's there. It's something we're synchronizing again from on-premises to the cloud, so that's included. If you're synchronizing something from the cloud with the Azure Active Directory back to on-premises, then you will need to purchase Azure Active Directory Premium, with the exception of Exchange Hybrid. So Exchange Hybrid was included a part of DirSync and will continue to be free with the Azure Active Directory. But when we're talking about the need and the want to have that self-service password reset with write back, or the write back from Azure Active Directory back to on-premises for users or groups, some of those other functionalities, that's when you would have to purchase the Azure Active Directory Premium level of service. I did want to share real quick, I was excited because Microsoft is making such a big deal about that centralized identity access and management. It's really behind the scenes of everything that's done in Azure. It's what gives you identity and access management to all of that and those solutions that encompass that, the Azure world. So with that, Microsoft is moving on up. I had a former boss at that state agency where I worked that was very, very paid attention to the Gartner Magic Quadrant very heavily. So this would make him smile, and like I said, it makes me smile. So Microsoft just recently, as of June this year, moved up to the leader quadrant, that Magic Quadrant, when it comes to identity as a service. So that's a pretty cool thing. So you know that some of the stuff I've been talking about is Microsoft is really putting time and effort, not just kind of having this out there and leaving it be. They're constantly improving it, and like I said, maybe even it's looking to be one day have a directory services in the cloud for your environment that you're actually not have hands-on in the care and feeding, day-to-day care and feeding. Microsoft is even looking to have that with that Azure Active Directory. So pretty cool there. Here at PCM, we have a strong professional services arm, especially around Microsoft Cloud offerings, and recently we started offering an identity management evaluation. Shown here is the description of a PCM-funded engagement that we will evaluate a customer's current identity and access environment. From this evaluation, based on best practices and business needs, one of our technical engineers will provide a report on the overall health of the environment, the identity environment that is, including a set of recommendations for any issues, issue resolutions, fitness of the environment in regard to hybrid identity, so that's where there's some tie-in to the slides we went over in this webinar, and then as well as infrastructure design improvements for moving forward. So if anyone out there sees some things here or would like to learn more about that evaluation or even set it up, please feel free to reach out, and one of our team members will get back to you to either schedule that engagement or talk more about it. So I've done a lot of talking about a lot of different features with the synchronization. Hopefully I've answered some of those questions, and I would open up the floor to find out if you have any more or anything else that you'd like me to maybe address while we have a few moments.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was a great presentation. I've got a couple of questions lined up for you.
Okay.
Okay, the first one I have is, what if an application I use every day isn't shown on the Active Directory marketplace? Can I add mine?
So yeah, I think it was on the prior slide, but basically if you don't, in that gallery of images, if you don't see an application that your users, a third-party SaaS application that your users use or that you want to have access to and include through Azure Active Directory, then yes, we can go ahead, and it's not a guarantee. Microsoft, of course, has to take a look at it, but they take suggestions through a form. It's just a small little simple form that can be entered in, and then they evaluate that that SaaS application to see if it can be included. And of course, it has to meet the requirements, and then you know, usually even some kind of one-off third-party SaaS applications have been involved. You just have to put that request out there.
Thank you. The second question is, what are the different ways I can get Azure Active Directory?
So we talked about the three versions of Active Directory. So you get the free version with Office 365 or an Azure tenant, which can do the synchronization we're talking about with Azure Active Directory Connect tool, as well as the basic and the premium version. So to get basic and premium, you would need to do that on an enterprise agreement. So there's different kind of vehicles for that, or different types of enterprise agreements, a server cloud enrollment or a more traditional enterprise agreement. But those two offerings, the Azure Active Directory Basic and Azure Active Directory Premium, would need to be purchased on an enterprise agreement.
Okay, thank you so much. I've got just, I think, one more question here. Where can I find out which SaaS applications Azure Active Directory supports single sign-on for?
So there's a link, and I didn't provide it in the slides, but I can to anyone that would like to follow up offline, or we can send that out. But that application gallery that I spoke of with the 2,600 plus applications, if you go to that URL, the Azure Marketplace, any of those applications you can search through, and those are the applications that are already pre-federated to use single sign-on through Azure Active Directory, and of course then your synchronization from on-premises to the cloud.
I think I've got time for one more question. There's one question from Takashi Shibuya, and the question is, what Windows Server operating system is needed in the office to be fully compatible with the hybrid environment using the Azure AD discussed here?
So when we talk about really any of the virtual machines in Azure, you have Windows 2008 R2 and above is what's supported if you're standing up a virtual machine in Azure. So those are supported with running different. If you were running the Azure Active Directory Connect tool, you can actually run that on a virtual machine in the cloud, or typically what we see is that's ran on a server in someone's environment. So that same requirement lives on premises. So if you had like a 2003 server, I don't believe that would be compatible.
Okay, thank you so much, Brian. I do not see any more questions, but still, if you have any questions, you can email them at mec@onpoint.com. So with that, thank you so much, Brian, for such a fantastic presentation, and thank you all for joining us today. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.